Anna's hands trembled as she reached into her small, faded purse, pulling out a collection of coins she had saved over months. The polished marble counter of the café gleamed under the lights, a cruel contrast to the dull metal in her hands. One by one, the coins fell with sharp metallic clinks, echoing through the quiet café. Each sound seemed louder than the last, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Behind her, customers began to shuffle impatiently, exchanging smirks. Anna kept her gaze fixed on the counter, her cheeks already burning. The cashier, a young woman with flawless makeup and a practiced smile, raised her eyebrows in disdain. "Coins? Really?" she muttered, her voice dripping with condescension. A ripple of laughter travelled from the back of the line, feeding on the cashier's mockery. Anna whispered a soft apology, her words almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the café. Her shoulders curved inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Still, she pushed another coin forward, determined to finish what she had started. The humiliation grew heavier with each second. At a corner table, Mr. Donovan sat in his tailored suit, sipping an espresso that had already gone cold. His eyes, usually indifferent, followed the scene with unexpected sharpness. He had seen Anna countless times in his home, dusting shelves and serving meals, yet she had always blended into the background. To him, she was invisible, a fixture of his house rather than a person. But here, under the fluorescent lights, she seemed startlingly human. Something about her trembling hands unsettled him deeply. The café's atmosphere thickened with ridicule. A young man near the window laughed openly, elbowing his friend as if Anna's struggle were a form of entertainment. A group of wealthy women, their manicured nails wrapped around porcelain cups, whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Some people shouldn't even be here," one of them said, her words slicing through Anna's already fragile composure. Anna's fingers fumbled, dropping a coin that rolled across the floor. The laughter that followed rang in her ears like a cruel chorus. Anna bent down to retrieve the runaway coin, her knees brushing against the polished floor that had never been meant for her presence. As she straightened up, her eyes glistened, threatening to spill tears she refused to shed. She placed the coin on the counter with quiet dignity, though her heart pounded in shame. The cashier sighed dramatically, tapping her manicured nails against the register. Each sound was a reminder of Anna's supposed place in the world. The moment stretched, unbearable and sharp. Mr. Donovan shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around the porcelain handle of his cup. He felt an unfamiliar twist in his chest, something close to anger, but heavier. The voices around him blended into a low hum of cruelty, yet all he could focus on were Anna's trembling shoulders. He wondered why he cared now, when for years he hadn't cared at all. Perhaps it was the setting, perhaps the laughter. But something about this moment felt different. For the first time in a long while, he could not look away. Anna's mind raced as she tried to ignore the stares burning into her back. She thought of the nights she had skipped meals, the sacrifices made to save these coins for one small luxury. This coffee was not about taste, it was about dignity, about allowing herself to feel normal for once. Yet that small dream was unraveling in front of her, mocked by strangers. She pressed her lips tightly, refusing to let her voice break. If she crumbled now, they would win completely. The cashier finally began to count the coins, her movements exaggerated, her eyes rolling dramatically at each handful. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, making no effort to lower her voice. The laughter that followed felt like knives in Anna's chest. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor beneath her feet. Still, she stood her ground, though her knees threatened to buckle. Every coin was a reminder of her perseverance, though here it felt like evidence of her shame. Across the room, Mr. Donovan's jaw tightened. He recognized the cruel ease with which wealth dismissed the poor because he had practiced it himself. Yet, watching Anna now, so exposed and defenseless, forced him to confront something he had long buried. Her humiliation echoed like a mirror of his own failures, a reflection of his blindness. He set his cup down with a sharp clink, the sound louder than he intended. A decision was forming in his chest, though he had not yet moved. And here, before anything changes, let me pause. What would you have done if you were in Anna's place, standing in a room full of laughter, clutching coins that carried the weight of your sacrifices? Think about that for a moment. If this story already touches you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's step back in time and see how Anna's journey led her to this moment of humiliation that would change everything. Mr. Donovan remained seated, his posture stiff against the velvet cushion of his chair. He watched Anna's humiliation unfold with unsettling clarity, every detail burning into his mind. The clinking of coins, the cashier's disdain, the sneers of strangers, it all formed a cruel symphony. He tried to sip his espresso again, but the taste felt bitter, almost sour. His hand lingered on the cup, heavy and reluctant. Something inside him whispered that this moment was demanding more than silent observation. He noticed the way Anna's shoulders hunched inward, as if trying to shield herself from invisible blows. Her back curved under the weight of ridicule, her breath shallow and uneven. Donovan could see the faint shimmer of tears she tried to hold back, the trembling of her lips pressed firmly together. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her, fragile and breakable. For years he had passed her in hallways without a second thought. Now she seemed like the only person in the room. The cafe around them carried on with its cruel performance. The hiss of the espresso machine mixed with bursts of laughter, creating an atmosphere heavy with mockery. Donovan's gaze traveled across the polished shoes, glittering jewelry, and sleek handbags scattered among the patrons. Every detail seemed designed to remind Anna of what she lacked. The divide between her world and theirs stretched like a canyon, wide and merciless. Donovan felt as though he were standing at its edge, uncertain which side he belonged to. One sharp laugh pierced the room, drawing Donovan's eyes to a young man by the window. The man leaned back arrogantly, pointing at Anna's hands with a smirk that cut like glass. "Pathetic," he muttered to his friend, loud enough for Anna to hear. The words landed heavily, striking Donovan harder than expected. He had spoken words like that before, dismissive and thoughtless, but hearing them now felt unbearable. He clenched his jaw, realizing he was no longer detached from what was happening. Inside, a battle stirred. Part of him urged silence. After all, she was just his maid. Someone hired to work in his home, not a person to defend. Another part, a quieter yet stronger part, whispered that dignity belonged to everyone. Donovan struggled to recognize this voice, one that had been silent for years under layers of pride and wealth. It unsettled him, but it also pulled at him relentlessly. The more he tried to ignore it, the louder it became. Anna's eyes darted nervously toward the exit, as though she wanted to escape, but couldn't bring herself to leave. She clutched the paper cup the cashier finally slid toward her, holding it with both hands as if it were a fragile treasure. Her knuckles turned pale against the cardboard sleeve. Donovan noticed the way she exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. She wanted to disappear, yet she forced herself to stay rooted in place. It was a quiet act of courage, though no one seemed to notice. Donovan felt the urge to stand, but his body resisted. He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming against the table, a rhythm born from unease. His conscience pressed harder, reminding him that silence was complicity. He thought of how many times he had overlooked Anna in his home, her quiet presence, her tired eyes, the faint limp in her step. He realized that indifference was easier than seeing, yet in this café, under the scrutiny of strangers, indifference felt cowardly. The café's golden light reflected against the marble counter, illuminating Anna in a way that made her seem both fragile and resilient. Donovan's eyes stayed fixed on her, the rest of the world blurring. He noticed her purse, worn and frayed, resting awkwardly against her hip. It was a stark contrast to the glossy handbags displayed around the room. That purse, he thought, was a story in itself, one of survival, sacrifice, and quiet battles no one cared to know. He tried to rationalize his inaction. Perhaps someone else would step in. Perhaps Anna herself would gather the strength to fight back. But deep down, he knew the truth. No one else cared. The laughter, the whispers, the cashier's smug expression, they all proved that compassion had no place in this room. If he stayed seated, Anna would walk out carrying not only her coffee, but also the crushing weight of humiliation. Donovan could feel the choice tightening around him like a noose. Still, he did nothing. He sat, motionless, torn between the man he had been and the man he might become. The café buzzed with cruel energy, but inside him was only silence. He stared at Anna's trembling hands and wondered why they mattered so much now. For years she had been invisible. Why was she suddenly impossible to ignore? The question lingered in his mind, heavy and insistent, as though demanding an answer he was not ready to give. Anna tightened her grip on the warm paper cup, her mind still replaying every cruel sound that had filled the café. The sharp clinks of the coins seemed louder in her memory, echoing like reminders of her place in the world. Each coin had been saved through quiet sacrifices, nights when she skipped meals or chose bus fare over dinner. They were not just money. They were pieces of her resilience, but to everyone else they were only symbols of shame. The contrast tore at her heart. Her coat, patched and faded, clung to her thin frame as though it carried its own history of survival. The luxurious aroma of roasted beans hung in the air, taunting her with its richness. Around her, customers leaned into leather chairs, their laughter ringing like music reserved for another world. She felt like an intruder, a shadow among them, and yet all she had wanted was a simple coffee, something to remind her she was human too. That small dream now felt foolish. The cashier tapped her nails impatiently, as if counting Anna's coins had been a personal insult. With every exaggerated movement, Anna's shame deepened. She whispered, "I'm sorry," again, though no one cared to hear it. The apology felt empty, but it was all she had left. Her throat ached with the weight of unshed tears. The cup in her hands grew heavier, not lighter, as if it carried the judgment of the room. Memories began to stir as she walked toward the door, careful not to spill a drop of her coffee. She thought of the nights spent hunched over her son's homework, pretending she wasn't hungry so he could eat more. She thought of the endless cleaning, the aching in her back, the silence she carried like armor. Each coin she had saved carried a fragment of those sacrifices. And now, strangers had reduced them to nothing but noise. The injustice burned quietly inside her chest. She remembered hiding coins in a small tin under her bed, each one carefully added after long days of work. Sometimes she would count them just to remind herself that progress, however small, was possible. That tin had been her secret, her quiet rebellion against despair. And yet, here she was, mocked for the very effort that had kept her moving forward. Her pride cracked under the weight of the moment. Still, she held the cup as though it were proof of something. Donovan's eyes lingered on her as she left the counter. He couldn't stop replaying the clinking of coins, each sound resonating like a call he had failed to answer. He thought of the wealth tucked away in his accounts, numbers so large they meant nothing anymore. And then he thought of Anna, pouring fragments of her life into that coffee. The disparity cut him sharper than he expected. For the first time, his money felt heavy, not freeing. It felt like guilt. Anna passed the group of wealthy women, their perfume thick in the air, their laughter still buzzing in her ears. She kept her eyes low, praying the door would come quickly. But one of them leaned close to her friend and whispered, "She must have begged for that change." The words brushed past Anna like knives, but she refused to stop. If she paused, she knew her legs would give out. Pride was all she could carry out of that café. Her reflection flashed in the glass of the café door before she pushed it open. She barely recognized herself. The hollow cheeks, the tired eyes, the coat that had seen too many winters. For a moment, she wondered if they were right, if she truly didn't belong there. But then she remembered her son's laughter, the way his eyes lit up when she returned home with something special. That thought steadied her steps. She would not let them define her worth. Behind her, Donovan's chair scraped softly against the marble floor. His body was still seated, but his conscience was already moving. He couldn't escape the weight of the scene. The cashier's disdain, the cruel whispers, Anna's trembling hands. The coins still echoed in his ears, louder than his own heartbeat. He realized they were not just Anna's burden anymore. Somehow, they had become his too. And yet Anna didn't know that a choice was about to be made. To her, this humiliation would linger as another scar, another memory of being unseen. She clutched the cup, its warmth seeping into her cold hands, as if it were the last piece of dignity she had. But Donovan's gaze followed her with unsettling intensity. Something inside him was shifting, something he could not yet name. The story was no longer just hers. It was slowly becoming his as well. As Anna disappeared through the café doors, Donovan's mind did not let her go. The clinking of coins still echoed, but now it blended with memories he had long dismissed. He saw her moving quietly through the grand halls of his home, dusting. Shelves lined with books he never read. She moved like a shadow, never demanding attention, never raising her voice. He realized he had grown used to her silence, mistaking it for insignificance. That thought now unsettled him. He remembered mornings when she appeared before sunrise, her steps soft against the marble floors. She carried trays of breakfast with practiced precision, never spilling a drop of tea. He never asked if she had eaten herself. He assumed it wasn't his concern. His father had taught him that staff were not family, only function. Yet now, those mornings replayed differently in his mind, colored by her humiliation at the café. For the first time, he wondered what her mornings cost her. Evenings came to him next. Anna placing dinner plates at the long mahogany table while he sat distracted by emails and investments. She moved in silence, blending into the rhythm of his house like background music. He couldn't recall ever thanking her sincerely, not once. It was always routine, always expected, but as he thought about her today, standing under the harsh café lights, he felt guilt swelling inside him. Silence, he realized, had been his greatest cruelty. One memory pressed harder than the rest. The day she had approached him, her voice trembling to ask for an advance. He had barely looked at her, dismissing her request with a wave of his hand. At the time, it felt justified. She was an employee, not his responsibility. But now, he replayed the flicker of disappointment in her eyes as she retreated. Could that single moment have led to the coins she carried today? The possibility weighed heavily on him. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his untouched espresso turning cold. The café around him buzzed with idle chatter, but he no longer heard it. His mind was a reel of images, Anna sweeping, Anna ironing, Anna carrying burdens he had never seen. Each memory stabbed with a sharpness he didn't expect. He realized that her invisibility had not been natural. It had been chosen by him every time he failed to acknowledge her existence. His father's voice echoed in his thoughts, stern and cold. Wealth separates us from them. Remember that. Those words had shaped him, built the armor he wore daily. But today, that armor cracked. For the first time, he questioned whether separation was strength or cowardice. He looked at the wealthy customers around him, laughing and mocking, and wondered if he had become just like them. The thought made him recoil inwardly. Donovan lifted his gaze toward the door Anna had just walked through. He imagined her carrying that cup back to her small home, holding it as a victory despite its bitterness. He wondered how many other victories she had scraped together in silence. He thought of her son, faintly remembered from a photograph on her phone, and felt a pang of shame. He had never asked about her life beyond his mansion's walls. Now he wanted to know everything. The cold espresso in his cup felt symbolic, luxury left to waste while she had fought for a simple coffee. He set the cup down, watching the dark liquid ripple under the light. For years, he had measured his life by numbers on a screen, deals signed, properties acquired. But what did it matter when one woman's struggle weighed more heavily on him than all his fortunes combined? The question haunted him, refusing to be silenced. He imagined Anna's hands again, wrinkled from cleaning, trembling as she counted coins. Those hands had served him countless times, steady and reliable, while his own had remained idle. Suddenly, her work felt less like employment and more like sacrifice. He wondered how many other sacrifices she had made, hidden behind quiet eyes and lowered shoulders. The thought unsettled him so deeply that he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For once, wealth offered no comfort. Donovan closed his eyes briefly, the sounds of the café fading into the distance. All he could see was Anna, standing at the counter, her pride slowly unraveling under ridicule. He felt as though the humiliation had been his own, mirrored through her pain. The weight of his memories pressed hard against him, urging him to act differently. Something inside him was awakening, something long buried beneath wealth and indifference. He opened his eyes, knowing he could not go back to ignoring her. The cashier finally dropped the last coin into the register, snapping the drawer shut with exaggerated impatience. Her sigh carried across the café, dripping with disdain. She handed Anna the receipt as though it were an insult rather than a courtesy. A smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, feeding the mockery that had already poisoned the room. Anna lowered her eyes, clutching the coffee cup with both hands. She wanted only to vanish into the air around her. From the corner, a sharp laugh broke through the café's low chatter. A group of wealthy women, draped in designer coats, leaned close to one another. Their manicured hands covered their lips, but their laughter spilled into the open. "Some people don't belong here," one of them said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words landed like a slap, cold and merciless. Anna's chest tightened as the blood rushed to her cheeks. Her lips trembled, though she pressed them together to hold back tears. She had endured whispers and stares before, but never this direct, this cruel. The shame crawled up her spine like fire, threatening to consume her entirely. Still, she refused to break in front of them. She clutched her cup tighter, its warmth burning into her palms. It was the only thing tethering her to her dignity in that moment. Donovan's eyes sharpened, his jaw tightening with each passing second. The laughter grated against him like broken glass, louder than the cafe's background hum. He had been silent through countless injustices before, but this felt unbearable. Watching Anna bite her lip, trying to swallow her pain, stirred something in him. Her suffering had become his mirror, reflecting a man he no longer wanted to be. He felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. The women continued their cruel chorus, their laughter spilling like poison into the air. One of them leaned back in her chair, her voice dripping with superiority. She should have stayed in her place. The comment echoed louder than the hiss of steaming milk, louder than the clinking of porcelain cups. Donovan shifted forward, his hands gripping the edge of his table. The urge to intervene burned hotter now, impossible to ignore. His silence was beginning to feel like betrayal. Anna's eyes darted to the floor, searching for safety where none existed. The tiled surface blurred beneath her tears, threatening to spill. She wanted to leave, to escape the stares and the voices clawing at her pride, but leaving now would mean they had won, that her dignity had been crushed completely. So she stood frozen, trembling, a quiet storm inside her chest. To the world she looked small, but inside she fought to remain unbroken. Donovan's pulse quickened, the weight of choice pressing down on him. He could feel every eye in the café locked onto Anna, feeding off her pain like vultures circling prey. The cruelty was no longer background noise, it was the room itself. For years, he had been comfortable being part of that world, the world of laughter at another's expense, but something in him resisted now, clawing at the walls of his pride. He realized he was standing on the edge of change. The cashier, emboldened by the laughter, smirked as she turned away. Her dismissal was the final insult, reducing Anna's effort to nothing but inconvenience. The cruel ease with which she disregarded Anna made Donovan's stomach churn. He thought of the times he had dismissed Anna with the same ease, without malice but with indifference. Indifference, he realized, was no less harmful. It cut just as deeply, leaving scars no one could see. Anna's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to remain calm. She felt the laughter pressing against her skin, suffocating her. The coffee cup trembled in her hands, threatening to spill, though she held it tighter. She longed to be anywhere but here, anywhere she wasn't a target. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance remained. She would not let them see her break, not yet. And in that moment, Donovan knew. He could no longer sit, no longer hide behind wealth and silence. The cruel laughter had awakened something he thought long dead. A conscience, raw and insistent. He pushed his chair back, the screech of wood against marble cutting through the noise of the cafe. Heads turned, eyes widening in surprise. Donovan rose slowly, a storm brewing inside him. For the first time, silence would not be his answer. The chair scraped loudly against the marble floor as Donovan pushed it back. The sound sliced through the cafe, silencing a few whispers mid-laugh. Every head turned instinctively, curiosity pulling their eyes toward the man in the tailored suit. Donovan rose slowly, each movement deliberate, heavy with intent. His stature, once comfortable in detachment, now carried an undeniable weight. For the first time, the cafe's attention shifted away from Anna. Anna blinked in confusion, her tear-filled eyes catching sight of him. She recognized him instantly, though her mind refused to accept what it meant. Her employer, silent, distant, untouchable, was standing. The shock made her heart lurch, adding another layer of uncertainty to her trembling chest. Was this pity or something more? She clutched the cup tighter, unsure whether to feel exposed or protected. The cafe's atmosphere shifted, the mocking energy thinning into uneasy silence. The wealthy women exchanged nervous glances, their smirks faltering. The young man by the window straightened, his arrogance dimming under Donovan's gaze. Even the cashier froze, her dismissive expression softening into confusion. Donovan's presence was commanding, not because of wealth, but because of resolve. It was as if the room had suddenly remembered its conscience. Donovan's footsteps echoed as he crossed the polished floor, steady and deliberate. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he carried years of silence on his shoulders. He had ignored Anna for so long, but here, in front of strangers, Her dignity demanded his defense. His heart pounded, each beat urging him closer to the counter. For once, his wealth felt irrelevant. It was his humanity that mattered, and that terrified him. Anna's breath caught as Donovan drew closer. Her world had been humiliation moments ago, but now it shifted into something unfamiliar. She couldn't decide whether to feel hope or dread. Why would he, of all people, intervene now? She wanted to ask, but her voice refused to leave her lips. Instead, she stared at him. Her confusion etched into every tear-streaked line of her face. Donovan reached the counter, his shadow stretching across the marble. The cashier shifted uncomfortably, her earlier smugness fading under his presence. The laughter had vanished entirely, leaving a tense quiet in its place. Donovan's hands hung at his sides, his fists clenched and unclenched, as though wrestling with words. This was a battlefield he had never trained for, one that required no contracts, no money, only courage. He inhaled deeply, preparing to speak. The silence pressed harder, thick and expectant. Every customer leaned subtly forward, drawn to the drama unfolding before them. Donovan could feel the weight of their stares, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was the woman beside him, trembling under the weight of ridicule she didn't deserve. His decision was no longer about appearances. It was about finally seeing what had always been there. Anna lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. Part of her wanted to slip out quietly to avoid the spotlight, yet another part, small but steady, longed for him to continue. For once, she wasn't invisible. For once, her suffering wasn't being ignored. The thought alone made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. She waited, holding her breath. Donovan's heart thundered, his body tense with both fear and certainty. He had been silent for too long, complicit in ways he hadn't understood until now. But silence would no longer suffice. He glanced at Anna, then at the room filled with expectant eyes. The decision solidified in him, like stone hardening under pressure. He knew what he had to do. And so Donovan stood tall at the counter, his presence alone defying the cruelty that had filled the cafe moments before. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, the line between indifference and action. What he would say next would echo far beyond this room. The world held its breath, waiting for the man of silence to finally find his voice. Donovan placed himself beside Anna, his tall frame casting a shadow across the counter. The cashier froze, her confidence slipping as she recognized him, not just a wealthy man, but one of those men who commanded respect with his presence alone. Gasps rippled through the cafe as whispers spread quickly. This was no longer just a maid being mocked. This was a scene everyone would remember. Donovan's jaw tightened as he pulled out his wallet, his movements steady and controlled. With a quiet firmness, he set a crisp $100 bill on the counter. The cashier's smirk vanished, replaced by startled silence. Her fingers hesitated over the register, unsure how to respond. Around the cafe, eyes widened at the gesture, as though Donovan had broken an unspoken rule. The bill seemed to gleam under the cafe lights, a silent statement of worth. Donovan's voice followed, low but sharp. Her money is worth the same as anyone else's. The words cut through the room like a blade. Conversations halted, laughter died instantly, and the weight of shame settled over those who had mocked Anna. Even the wealthy women who had whispered so cruelly earlier shrank back into their seats. The cashier swallowed hard, fumbling with the bill. Donovan's gaze didn't waver, his tone unwavering. He was no longer speaking as a millionaire, but as a man who refused to let cruelty stand. Anna's breath hitched, her eyes widening in disbelief. She turned slowly to look at Donovan, her confusion mingling with relief. For years, he had passed her like a shadow, invisible in the halls of his mansion. Yet here he was, defending her in front of strangers. The paradox unsettled her, filling her chest with both gratitude and unease. She wanted to speak, but no words came. The cafe held its collective breath, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Donovan's words echoed long after they were spoken, demanding recognition. The cashier finally moved, sliding the bill into the register without another word. The air around them shifted, no longer charged with mockery, but with quiet shame. For the first time, the laughter had vanished completely. All that remained was silence, sharp and undeniable. The young man by the window who had mocked Anna earlier shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His smirk dissolved, his eyes lowering to the floor. The wealthy women glanced at one another, suddenly restless, their jewelry and designer coats no longer shields. Donovan's stance had stripped the cruelty from the room, leaving only guilt in its place. The power of wealth had spoken, but not in the way anyone expected. It had spoken for dignity, not division. Anna's hands trembled around her coffee cup, but not from humiliation this time. She felt the shift, the strange protection of Donovan's presence. Still, she couldn't shake the thought. Why now? Why had he chosen this moment after so many years of silence? Her mind swirled with questions she couldn't voice. Yet, beneath the confusion, a flicker of strength returned. She no longer felt completely alone. Donovan stood tall, his expression unyielding. His heart pounded in his chest, louder than the silence he had created. This was unfamiliar territory for him, a battlefield with no contracts or negotiations. It was raw humanity, messy and unpolished. But he knew he couldn't return to the man who once ignored her. Something had awakened inside him, and it demanded to be honored. The cashier muttered a half-hearted apology, her voice small and uncertain. Donovan didn't respond. His silence was louder than any rebuke. The room had already passed judgment on itself, every mocking laugh now echoing as regret. Donovan glanced at Anna, offering the faintest nod. It wasn't grand, but it was enough. Enough to say he saw her, perhaps for the first time. Anna lowered her gaze, her heart racing with unfamiliar emotions. Gratitude and disbelief collided within her, leaving her breathless. She had walked into the cafe prepared for humiliation, but not for this, never for this. The moment was fragile, teetering between hope and suspicion. Yet one thing was certain, her world, and his, would never be the same again. The cafe froze in the wake of Donovan's words. No one dared to laugh now. No one whispered. The air hung heavy, filled with the echoes of what had just unfolded. The cashier's eyes flickered nervously, her earlier arrogance gone. Customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes avoiding Anna's trembling figure. For the first time, the room seemed to acknowledge her humanity. Anna clutched her coffee cup as though it were an anchor. Its warmth spread into her hands, grounding her against the storm of emotions swirling inside. Her humiliation had not vanished, but it no longer defined her completely. Donovan's gesture had shifted the weight, redistributing it across the room. The shame now belonged not just to her, but to those who had mocked her. It was a strange, fragile victory. Donovan stood silently beside her, his presence alone enough to command the room. He felt anger simmering still, but relief began to seep into its edges. For once, he hadn't stayed silent, hadn't chosen comfort over conscience. He had acted, and though it was small in the scale of his wealth, it felt monumental in his heart. He realized his silence had always been a choice, and today he had broken it. That thought filled him with both pride and unease. The wealthy women who had laughed earlier sat stiffly, their faces pale under the cafe's golden light. None of them dared to meet Anna's eyes. Their laughter now felt hollow, an echo of cruelty they wished they could erase. One of them stirred her. spoon nervously in her untouched cappuccino, the sound tinny and awkward. The shift in the room was undeniable. The mockery had withered into regret. Anna's eyes flicked toward Donovan, searching his face for answers. Why was he doing this? What did it mean? Her chest tightened as she tried to reconcile the distant man she worked for with the defender standing beside her now. She didn't know which version was real, but in that silence, she felt something stir, an odd mix of gratitude and suspicion. She wasn't invisible anymore, and that alone was disorienting. Donovan sensed her gaze but didn't meet it. His own mind was heavy with questions he couldn't yet face. Why now? Why her? Why this moment? He had no clear answers, only the undeniable certainty that staying silent had become unbearable. His choice was not about heroism, it was about conscience clawing its way to the surface. Still, the weight of expectation pressed on him from every direction. What came next? The cashier finally placed the change on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. She muttered something about a mistake, her voice barely audible. No one believed her words. They rang empty against the charged silence. Donovan didn't take the change, leaving the bill where it lay. The gesture spoke louder than any reprimand. The money didn't matter. What mattered was dignity, and that had been defended. Anna shifted her grip on the cup, the steam fogging her glasses briefly. She wanted to leave, to escape the suffocating weight of so many eyes. But her legs felt heavy, rooted by the enormity of what had just happened. She was no longer just a maid buying coffee. She was the center of a story none of them would forget. That thought unsettled her, even as it gave her strength. She stood still, breathing slowly. Donovan finally exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly. The tension in his chest loosened, though not entirely. The silence in the café was both victory and burden, a reminder that he had stepped across an invisible line. He knew he couldn't go back to being the man who ignored her. The shift had already happened, and its ripples were only beginning. For better or worse, he had changed something. Outside, the city bustled with indifference, unaware of the storm that had just passed inside the café. But for Anna and Donovan, the world had tilted on its axis. Nothing had truly been solved, yet nothing was the same. The silence carried a weight that would follow them both beyond these walls. And though they didn't yet know it, this moment was only the beginning of a deeper transformation. The cafe door closed behind Anna, and the noise of the city washed over her. Cars honked. Footsteps hurried past, and voices blended into a steady hum. Yet none of it could drown out the memory of what had just happened. The laughter, the stares, the $100 bill, all of it replayed endlessly in her mind. She clutched her coffee cup tighter, as though it held the answers she couldn't find. Her heart pounded, heavy with confusion. She was grateful. How could she not be? Donovan had silenced the cruel voices, had shielded her when no one else cared to. For a brief moment, she hadn't been alone. But gratitude wrestled with pride, and pride fought back fiercely. She didn't want pity, didn't want to be seen as weak. Was his gesture kindness, or simply an act of charity meant to soothe his conscience? The uncertainty stung more than the humiliation itself. Anna's feet carried her down the busy sidewalk, but her mind lagged behind, tangled in questions. She thought of the years she had worked for Donovan, moving like a ghost through his mansion. He had never noticed her struggles before, never asked, never cared. Why now? Why in front of strangers? She wanted to believe it was genuine, but doubt coiled tightly around her heart. She had lived too long in silence to trust easily. The sunlight felt too bright, almost harsh against her tired eyes. It illuminated her patched coat, her scuffed shoes, the cup trembling in her hands. She felt exposed, as though the whole city could see the shame she carried. She wished she could slip into the shadows, unseen once more. But part of her knew that something had changed in that cafe. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years, and that terrified her. Her son's face flashed in her mind, his wide smile when she brought home even the smallest treat. That was why she had saved the coins, why she endured the humiliation. This coffee wasn't just for her, it was for him, a reminder that they could still share small joys. She imagined his laughter, the warmth of his hug, and her chest ached. Would he ever know what it had cost her? Would she tell him? Or would she hide this moment away? Anna paused at a crosswalk, staring at the red light. Around her, people bustled impatiently, but she stood frozen. A question pressed into her mind, sharp and relentless. Was she grateful to Donovan or angry at him? Gratitude whispered yes, but pride screamed no. She didn't want to owe him anything, and yet she couldn't deny the relief that had washed over her when he had spoken. The conflict tore at her, leaving her unsettled. She crossed the street slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground. The city smelled of exhaust and roasted chestnuts, a mix of grit and warmth. The world carried on as though nothing had happened, but inside her, everything had shifted. She felt raw, every nerve exposed. The humiliation was still there, lingering like a bruise, but so was something else, an unfamiliar hope she didn't trust. It flickered faintly, refusing to die. Her thoughts circled back to Donovan's voice, steady and firm. Her money is worth the same as anyone else's. The words echoed louder than the laughter that had preceded them. For a moment, she had felt equal, defended, almost human again. That memory brought tears to her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now, not ever. Strength was survival, and survival was all she knew. As she turned the corner onto her street, the cafe felt both distant and painfully close. She wondered what Donovan thought of her now. Would he return to his mansion and forget the whole thing, as though it had never happened? Or had something shifted in him as well? She shook her head, scolding herself for even caring. He was her employer, nothing more. Still, the questions gnawed at her. Anna unlocked the door to her modest apartment, the hinges squeaking softly. The familiar scent of detergent and warm bread greeted her, grounding her at last. She set the coffee on the small kitchen table and sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Gratitude, pride, anger, hope, they all collided inside her, leaving her exhausted. She whispered to herself as if the words could bring clarity. "Why now? Why him?" But no answer came. Only silence. The cafe door closed behind Anna, and the noise of the city washed over her. Footsteps hurried past, and voices blended into a steady hum, yet none of it could drown out the memory of what had just happened. The laughter, the stares, the $100 bill, all of it replayed endlessly in her mind. She clutched her coffee cup tighter, as though it held the answers she couldn't find. Her heart pounded, heavy with confusion. She was grateful. How could she not be? Donovan had silenced the cruel voices, had shielded her when no one else cared to. For a brief moment, she hadn't been alone. But gratitude wrestled with pride, and pride fought back fiercely. She didn't want pity, didn't want to be seen as weak. Was his gesture kindness, or simply an act of charity meant to soothe his conscience? The uncertainty stung more than the humiliation itself. Anna's feet carried her down the busy sidewalk, but her mind lagged behind, tangled in questions. She thought of the years she had worked for Donovan, moving like a ghost through his mansion. He'd never noticed her struggles before, never asked, never cared. Why now? Why in front of strangers? She wanted to believe it was genuine, but doubt coiled tightly around her heart. She had lived too long in silence to trust easily. The sunlight felt too bright, almost harsh against her tired eyes. It illuminated her patched coat, her scuffed shoes, the cup trembling in her hands. She felt exposed, as though the whole city could see the shame she carried. She wished she could slip into the shadows, unseen once more. But part of her knew that something had changed in that cafe. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years, and that terrified her. Her son's face flashed in her mind, his wide smile when she brought home even the smallest treat. That was why she had saved the coins, why she endured the humiliation. This coffee wasn't just for her, it was for him, a reminder that they could still share small joys. She imagined his laughter, the warmth of his hug, and her chest ached. Would he ever know what it had cost her? Would she tell him, or would she hide this moment away? Anna paused at a crosswalk, staring at the red light. Around her, people bustled impatiently, but she stood frozen. A question pressed into her mind, sharp and relentless. Was she grateful to Donovan, or angry at him? Gratitude whispered yes, but pride screamed no. She didn't want to owe him anything, and yet she denied the relief that had washed over her when he had spoken. The conflict tore at her, leaving her unsettled. She crossed the street slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground. The city smelled of exhaust and roasted chestnuts, a mix of grit and warmth. The world carried on as though nothing had happened, but inside her, everything had shifted. She felt raw, every nerve exposed. The humiliation was still there, lingering like a bruise. But so was something else, an unfamiliar hope she didn't trust. It flickered faintly, refusing to die. Her thoughts circled back to Donovan's voice, steady and firm. Her money is worth the same as anyone else's. The words echoed louder than the laughter that had preceded them. For a moment she had felt equal, defended, almost human again. That memory brought tears to her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Not ever. Strength was survival, and survival was all she knew. As she turned the corner onto her street, the cafe felt both distant and painfully close. She wondered what Donovan thought of her now. Would he return to his mansion and forget the whole thing, as though it had never happened? Or had something shifted in him as well? She shook her head, scolding herself for even caring. He was her employer, nothing more. Still, the questions gnawed at her. Anna unlocked the door to her modest apartment, the hinges squeaking softly. The familiar scent of detergent and warm bread greeted her, grounding her at last. She set the coffee on the small kitchen table and sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Gratitude, pride, anger, hope, they all collided inside her, leaving her exhausted. She whispered to herself, as if the words could bring clarity. Why now? Why him? But no answer came, only silence. Donovan sat in the back seat of his sleek black car. The driver asked quietly against his palms if he wanted to head home, but Donovan didn't answer. His mind was far from the polished streets outside the tinted windows. Instead, it replayed the image of Anna's trembling hands, dropping coins onto the counter. The sound haunted him more than the city's noise. It echoed as a judgment, sharp and unrelenting. He adjusted his tie, though it wasn't crooked. The motion was nervous, unfamiliar, almost human. For years he had carried himself with ease, confident in every decision. But today, his reflection in the rearview mirror unsettled him. He didn't see a powerful man, but a stranger, with eyes clouded by guilt. The realization gnawed at him, leaving a bitter taste he couldn't swallow. It was the kind of bitterness no amount of wealth could sweeten. Memories of his father surfaced, harsh and unyielding. Strength means never bending, the old man had once told him. Donovan had lived by those words, treating compassion as weakness. He had built walls high enough to keep out every plea, every human need that wasn't his own. Yet in that cafe, those walls had cracked. He wondered if strength had blinded him all along, leaving him deaf to suffering. The thought stung like a betrayal. His phone buzzed beside him, screen lighting up with business emails, contracts, deals, numbers, all reminders of the empire he had built. Normally, such things gave him a sense of control, of purpose. But now, they felt hollow, like meaningless. Lines on paper. What did it matter when Anna had sacrificed meals for coins to buy a simple cup of coffee? Donovan pressed the phone face down, unwilling to look at it. The silence felt more honest. He thought of Anna's son, vaguely remembered from a photo she once kept on her phone. A boy with wide eyes and a crooked smile. Donovan imagined him waiting at home, unaware of his mother's humiliation. Would he grow up carrying the same invisible weight? Would the world laugh at him too? The idea unsettled Donovan, twisting his chest with a discomfort he couldn't name. For the first time, he cared. The city lights blurred past, golden streaks against the window. Donovan leaned back, staring at his reflection in the glass. The man looking back seemed older, heavier, worn by choices he had ignored. He wondered if indifference had aged him more than time ever could. He had always prided himself on control, but today had proven otherwise. He was not in control, not of the laughter, not of the shame, and certainly not of his own conscience. His thoughts drifted to the countless times Anna had stood in his mansion, unnoticed, carrying trays, scrubbing floors, folding linens. She had been everywhere, yet nowhere at the same time. He had never asked how she managed, never wondered if she struggled. In truth, he had never seen her at all, and now he couldn't stop seeing her. The contrast was unbearable, searing into him like a wound. The driver cleared his throat softly, hesitant to interrupt. "Sir." "Home." Donovan blinked, pulled back into the present. He nodded slowly, though part of him wanted to refuse. Home no longer felt like a refuge, but a reminder of his blindness. He imagined Anna stepping into those same halls tomorrow, moving silently as she always had. Would he go back to ignoring her? Or had something in him changed permanently? The question burned quietly inside. Donovan rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing down like a weight. He had faced boardrooms, hostile takeovers, legal battles, but nothing had shaken him like Anna's humiliation. It wasn't just about her, it was about him, about the man he had allowed himself to become, cold, detached, empty. The truth unsettled him. Wealth had not freed him, it had caged him in indifference, and now the bars were breaking. As the car rolled into his gated estate, Donovan felt no comfort in the grand iron gates or the manicured lawns. Instead, he felt a hollow ache, a sense of dissonance between his world and hers. The cafe scene clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. He knew he couldn't ignore it. Not this time. For the first time in years, Donovan felt an unfamiliar pull, not toward profit but toward change, and it terrified him more than failure ever had. The study was quiet that evening, the crackle of the fireplace the only sound filling the vast room. Donovan sat behind his desk, a leather-bound notebook open but untouched before him. He had rehearsed the words in his head all day, yet none felt right. When Anna entered to dust the shelves, his heart quickened unexpectedly. She moved as she always did, efficient, silent, almost invisible. Tonight, however, Donovan could not allow her to remain unseen. "Anna," he said softly, his voice breaking the usual silence. She froze mid-step, her hands tightening around the cloth she carried. Rarely did he address her directly, and never in that tone. She turned slowly, her expression guarded, as if bracing for reprimand. Donovan swallowed, unsure of how to bridge years of distance. "I wanted to thank you," he added, the words awkward, foreign on his tongue. Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. "Thank me, sir?" she asked cautiously, her voice low. Gratitude was not something she expected from him, not after years of quiet servitude. Donovan nodded, though his hands fidgeted with the pen on his desk. "Not for your work," he clarified quickly, "but for your resilience, for enduring more than I ever cared to notice." The admission made his chest feel lighter, yet strangely exposed. Anna's grip tightened on the cloth, her instinct telling her not to trust too quickly. She had lived too long with silence to believe sudden kindness easily. Still, there was no mockery in his eyes, only something she didn't recognize. Sincerity. "Perhaps. I was just doing my job," she murmured, lowering her gaze. But her voice trembled, betraying emotions she hadn't meant to reveal. Donovan noticed, and it struck him harder than expected. Donovan leaned forward, his elbows pressing into the polished wood. "No," he said firmly, though his voice trembled slightly. "It wasn't just a job. I made it seem that way because it was easier for me. But I see now, I should have seen long before, that you carry more than anyone should alone." His words hung in the air, heavy yet liberating. Anna stood frozen, her silence louder than protest. She didn't know how to answer, and perhaps she didn't need to. The firelight danced across the room, casting flickering shadows on the shelves. Donovan watched her, realizing this was the first real conversation they had ever had. All the years of passing glances, of silence exchanged like currency, felt like wasted time. "I've been blind," he admitted quietly, his eyes fixed on hers. "Wrapped in my own world, ignoring yours, and I can't undo that. But I don't want to keep pretending anymore." Anna's throat tightened as she fought to keep her composure. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with power, but with humility. She wasn't sure if she could believe him, not yet, but something about his tone disarmed her, softening the armor she wore daily. She lowered the cloth to her side, standing straighter. "Why now?" she asked finally, her voice small but steady. It was the question that had burned inside her since the café. Donovan hesitated, his answer tangled in pride and shame. "Because for the first time I couldn't look away," he confessed. "I saw you, not as an employee, not as background, but as a person carrying more strength than I ever understood, and it broke something in me." His words trembled, unpolished and raw. He wasn't sure if they would heal anything, but they were the truest words he had spoken in years. The silence that followed was thick, but not hostile. Anna studied his face carefully, searching for cracks in his sincerity. She found no smirk, no dismissal, only a strange vulnerability she had never seen before. It unsettled her, but also softened something within her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but for the first time she believed he might be capable of change. That realization alone was a seed of hope. Donovan leaned back slowly, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The study felt different now, lighter, as though years of unspoken truth had finally broken free. He knew this was only the beginning, a single step on a long path. But it was a step he could no longer avoid. Across from him, Anna stood quietly, her eyes reflecting both doubt and strength. And for the first time, they were no longer strangers under the same roof. Anna stood in the study, her hands fidgeting with the cloth she still held. Donovan's words lingered in the air, unsettling her more than insults ever had. For years, silence had been her shield, her way of surviving in a world that rarely listened. Yet now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt the urge to speak. The weight on her chest demanded release. Slowly, carefully, she opened her mouth. "I've worked since I was 15, she began, her voice low but steady. Donovan leaned forward, every word pulling him closer. Cleaning houses, washing floors, taking care of other people's children, while mine stayed with neighbors. Her eyes glistened, though she refused to let the tears fall. "I thought if I worked hard enough, life would ease. But it hasn't." Every coin I saved for that coffee came from sacrifice." Her voice quivered on the last word. Donovan's chest tightened as he listened. He had never asked about her life, never cared to. But hearing it now, every detail cut deeper than the last. He imagined her walking home late at night, her back aching, her stomach empty. He saw her folding his shirts while worrying about her son's homework. The contrast between their worlds was unbearable. For the first time, he felt ashamed of his ignorance more than his wealth. Anna continued, her words gaining strength as they flowed. "My son is 10. He thinks I'm strong, but I'm tired, Mr. Donovan. So tired." She pressed a hand against her chest, as though holding herself together. "That coffee was supposed to be just a moment for me. A reminder that I'm still a person, not just someone who scrubs floors." She shook her head, her lips tightening. "And they laughed. They made me feel smaller than I already do." The firelight flickered against her face, illuminating both weariness and resilience. Donovan's throat ached with unspoken apologies. He wanted to tell her she was more than her suffering, more than the invisibility he had imposed on her, but the words felt fragile, inadequate. So he stayed silent, letting her truth fill the space. For once, silence was not dismissal, but respect. He wanted her to finish without interruption. Anna drew a shaky breath, her eyes glancing briefly toward the window. "You don't know what it's like to count coins for bread, to choose between food and electricity, to hide tears so your child doesn't see how scared you are." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I've lived my life invisible because it's easier for people not to see me. But invisibility is a cage, Mr. Donovan, and I've been trapped in it too long." Donovan's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. Every word felt like a stone placed on his chest, heavier and heavier. He wanted to deny it, to argue that life was hard for everyone in different ways. But he couldn't. Her truth was undeniable, and for once he refused to run from it. He let the weight settle because it was the least he owed her. His silence was no longer indifference, it was acknowledgement. Anna's eyes finally met his, steady despite the tears brimming at the edges. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her tone almost challenging. "I didn't need saving. I needed respect. I needed to not be laughed at for wanting something simple." Her words cut cleanly, sharper than any insult could. Donovan felt his pride shrink under the force of her honesty. For the first time he had no defense, only humility remained. Her breathing slowed as the fire crackled, filling the pause between them. Speaking her truth had cost her, but it had also freed her. The weight she carried felt lighter now, shared in a way it had never been before. Anna stood taller, her presence no longer small or invisible. Donovan saw it clearly. She wasn't fragile, she was strong, stronger than he had ever been. The realization humbled him further. Donovan leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you, Anna," he said, the words simple but heavy with sincerity. "I should have seen you long ago. I can't change the years I ignored you, but I can change what comes next." His eyes held hers, unflinching. For the first time they stood on the same ground, not as master and servant, but as two human beings, bound by truth. The days that followed felt different in Donovan's mansion. The silence was no longer heavy with indifference, it carried possibility. Donovan began noticing things he had long ignored. The weight of the trays Anna carried, the fatigue etched into her posture, the shadows under her eyes. Each detail was a reminder of how blind he had been. He could no longer look away. Action had become necessary. One morning he handed Anna an envelope. She frowned, hesitant, her fingers brushing the sealed paper cautiously. Inside was her salary, doubled, with a note, promising back pay for years of underappreciated work. "This isn't charity," Donovan said firmly, sensing her unease. "It's correction. I owe you more than I realized." Anna's lips parted, but no words came. Gratitude flickered across her face, tempered by suspicion. She had learned not to trust too quickly. Donovan didn't stop there. He adjusted her hours, giving her time to rest, to live. For the first time, she wasn't expected to move like a shadow through endless tasks. Instead, she left earlier in the evenings, her steps lighter as she walked out the door. She still carried the weight of survival, but not alone anymore. Donovan saw the difference in her eyes, small but undeniable. It gave him hope. He also began to ask questions, not out of curiosity but out of care. "How is your son?" he asked one evening, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Anna hesitated, then allowed herself a small smile as she spoke of him. His love for drawing, his dream of becoming an architect one day. Donovan listened intently, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest. For once, his wealth could serve a purpose beyond himself. Within a week, Donovan arranged for Anna's son to be enrolled in a better school, the tuition covered without hesitation. When Anna learned of it, her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Donovan met her gaze steadily. "Because no child should be limited by coins, and no mother should carry that weight alone." His words were simple, but they carried a depth she hadn't expected. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. The mansion itself began to change. Where once Anna moved silently, unnoticed, Donovan now acknowledged her presence with gratitude. A thank you here, a genuine smile there. It was new, awkward, but real. At first, Anna kept her guard up, but slowly, trust began to take root. Each gesture, each word, chipped away at the wall of invisibility she had built. She was no longer just a servant. She was seen. Donovan, too, felt the change within himself. He no longer measured his worth in contracts signed or profits gained. Instead, he found purpose in the quiet dignity of treating others with respect. It wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was real. For the first time, his wealth served something beyond his own comfort. It served humanity, hers and his. The shift was subtle, but profound. Anna struggled with the changes at first. Pride made her wary, afraid that his actions were just pity disguised as generosity. But consistency proved otherwise. Donovan didn't hover, didn't patronize. He simply acted with fairness and respect. Over time, her suspicions softened. Gratitude, cautious but genuine, began to take its place. For the first time in years, she felt dignity returning to her life. The dynamic between them shifted in ways neither expected. They were no longer master and maid, but two people learning from each other. Donovan discovered humility, and Anna rediscovered strength. Their lives, once divided by wealth and silence, now intersected with respect and humanity. The mansion that had once been a symbol of distance became a space of unexpected connection. It was a quiet transformation, but it carried weight. And as weeks turned into months, Donovan realized something remarkable. The act that had begun in a café, with coins clinking on marble, had set into motion a change far greater than he could have imagined. He had defended her dignity once, but now he was learning to honor it every day. For Anna, the world was no longer just about survival. For Donovan, it was no longer just about wealth. Together they were rewriting their stories. Months later, the café looked the same. Marble counters gleaming, golden lights casting warmth across polished tables. Yet for Anna and Donovan, stepping through its doors again felt entirely different. She walked with her head held higher, no coins clinking in her pockets. Donovan walked beside her, not as her employer, but as an equal. The room that had once been filled with cruelty now felt strangely small compared to the journey they had endured. Anna ordered without hesitation this time, her voice clear and steady. The cashier, not the same one from before, offered a polite smile. There were no smirks, no whispers, no cruel laughter. Instead, the café hummed with quiet civility. Donovan stood beside her, letting her lead. For the first time, Anna felt ownership of her presence. She belonged here, not by permission, but by right. When the coffee was handed to her, Anna smiled, a real smile, not one forced to hide pain. She turned to Donovan, who nodded softly, acknowledging the quiet victory. Around them, customers watched with curiosity, though not with contempt. Some seemed to recognize Donovan, others simply sensed the significance of the moment. Whatever they thought, it no longer mattered. Anna had reclaimed her dignity. They sat together at a small corner table, the very kind Anna had once felt unworthy of occupying. She set her cup down gently, savoring the aroma before taking a sip. Donovan watched, but this time not as a savior, not as a millionaire, simply as a man sharing a moment. The simplicity of it struck him. For all his wealth, happiness had rarely tasted so pure. Anna exhaled slowly, her shoulders finally free of the invisible weight she had carried. She glanced around the café, noticing how unremarkable it all seemed now. The grandeur that once overwhelmed her had lost its power. It was just a place, nothing more. The laughter that had once wounded her so deeply was a memory fading into the background. She was stronger now, unshakable in ways no one could take away. Donovan leaned back in his chair, reflecting quietly. He thought of his father's words about strength, of the years he had lived behind walls of pride. None of it mattered now. Real strength, he had learned, was not in wealth or superiority. It was in humility, in seeing others as human. Anna had taught him that, not through lectures, but through her resilience. He felt grateful in a way money could never buy. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on small things. Her son's drawings, the weather, even the best pastry in the café. It was ordinary but extraordinary in its own way. They laughed, and the sound carried warmth instead of mockery. Other customers glanced their way, sensing the bond, but without malice. What once had been a battlefield was now simply a shared space. The transformation was complete. Anna looked at Donovan thoughtfully. "You changed," she said softly, not as a compliment, but as a truth. Donovan smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting humility. "No," he replied, "you changed me." The words landed gently between them, carrying the weight of their journey. Anna lowered her gaze briefly, humbled by the acknowledgement. She had never expected to leave such an imprint on his life. The café around them bustled, unaware of the legacy being written at that corner table. To others, it was just a man and his maid sharing coffee. But to them, it was proof that dignity could be restored, that compassion could bridge even the widest divides. The world hadn't changed, but they had, and that was enough. Their lives would never again return to invisibility or indifference. As Anna lifted her cup one last time, she let herself savor not just the coffee, but the moment. Donovan mirrored her, raising his own in quiet solidarity. Together they shared a silence that wasn't empty but full, of respect, of change, of hope. And the story left behind a question, echoing far beyond those café walls. Lives could change. How many? If we dared to see those who are invisible. Sometimes the greatest transformations don't happen in boardrooms or in grand speeches. They happen in quiet moments, in a café over a handful of coins, or in the silence after laughter dies. Donovan's wealth could buy many things, but it was Anna's dignity that taught him the true value of humanity. And Anna, once invisible, discovered that even the smallest act of courage could ripple into lasting change. So I leave you with this question. How many people around us live unseen, carrying burdens we never notice? And what would happen if we chose, just once, to truly see them? If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Let's keep this conversation alive.